On a quiet autumn night in 2001, a shocking criminal conspiracy played out that would shake the entire nation. Assistant U.S. Attorney Tom Wales was gunned down in the basement of his own home, becoming the first sitting federal prosecutor in U.S. history to be assassinated. Wales had dedicated 18 years of his career to the U.S. Department of Justice, serving as an assistant U.S. attorney in Seattle and specializing in white-collar fraud cases. Colleagues knew him as a meticulous and hard-working prosecutor. Outside of work, he was active in civic life. He served on Seattle's Planning Commission and became a leading advocate for tough gun control laws. This blend of professional prominence and personal integrity made his sudden, violent death all the more shocking. On the evening of October 11, 2001, Wales was working at his computer in the downstairs office of his Queen Anne Hill home when an unknown assailant struck. Sometime around 10:40 p.m., a gunman slipped into his backyard, avoided motion lights, and fired multiple shots through a basement window, hitting Wales in the neck and chest. A neighbor heard the commotion and called 911. When first responders arrived, they found Wales collapsed at his desk. He was rushed to a hospital, but he died the next day from his injuries. Forensic experts determined that the weapon was a Makarov semi-automatic, fitted with an aftermarket barrel. This unusual modification left distinctive markings on the bullets and shell casings, giving agents one of their first solid leads. It was already clear to investigators that this was a planned assassination, not a random crime, and one witness reported seeing a lone male suspect fleeing the scene into the darkness. In the early days of the investigation, agents and Seattle police detectives scoured Wales's professional and personal life for clues. Before long, their attention zeroed in on a possible suspect, a commercial airline pilot whom Wales had prosecuted in a fraud case involving the illegal conversion of a helicopter. In this case, the pilot, along with his business partners, were accused of illegally modifying a military chopper for civilian use and sale. That case, which had been contentious and bitterly fought, ended with charges against the pilot being dropped. The pilot was irate at Wales, even suing the Justice Department for malicious prosecution to recoup his legal fees. Just weeks after Wales's slaying, FBI agents searched the pilot's home in Bellevue for evidence linking him to the crime. However, no forensic evidence tying him to the shooting was found, and he maintained an alibi that he was elsewhere that night. He claimed he'd been at a movie and then on a phone call at home when Wales was shot, an alibi the FBI couldn't disprove. As months passed, agents gradually eliminated other potential suspects, and the theory of a revenge plot by the embittered pilot remained front and center. The FBI also pursued the forensic trail. Knowing the perpetrator had used a rare aftermarket barrel, agents tried to trace every such barrel sold in the United States, roughly 2,600 in total. It was a painstaking nationwide effort, and despite testing many weapons, this effort did not turn up the missing gun. Years went by without an arrest, but the case never went cold. In fact, it stayed an active major case for the FBI, with a dedicated task force continually chasing leads. There were false hopes and red herrings. At one point, a jailhouse snitch claimed a cellmate had confessed to having been hired for the job, but that story fell apart under scrutiny. By 2006, 5 years after the act, no charges had been filed, but investigators were increasingly convinced the answer lay in a small circle of people connected to that pilot. An intriguing twist came in early 2006, when an anonymous letter arrived at the FBI office in Seattle. The letter, postmarked from Las Vegas and signed Gidget, claimed that a woman had paid the writer to eliminate Tom Wales. In lurid detail, the self-proclaimed professional described stalking Wales's house, shooting him through the window, and escaping after collecting payment for the job. The implications were chilling. If the letter was telling the truth, it meant Wales's slaying was a contract job. Agents noticed that the pilot suspect had coincidentally traveled to Las Vegas shortly before the letter was sent, raising suspicion that he might have been involved in this bizarre message. The pilot's attorney vehemently denied that his client had anything to do with the Gidget letter, and the author of the letter was never identified. Whether it was a genuine confession or a hoax, the letter reinforced the possibility that a hired professional was behind the trigger. Finally, in 2018, a significant public update arrived. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein came to Seattle in February 2018 to announce that the FBI had evidence Wales was slain as part of a conspiracy involving a professional hitman. This was the first official confirmation of the so-called hitman theory by the authorities. Investigators now believe that a small group of individuals had orchestrated the event. Officials cautioned that they still didn't have enough evidence to charge anyone, but they made it clear they no longer saw this as a potential lone wolf attack. The next year brought a hopeful development for the investigators. In 2019, a federal grand jury in Seattle indicted a woman named Shauna Reed for perjury and obstruction in connection with the Wales case. Investigators alleged that she had previously told police someone she knew bragged about being involved in the slaying. However, when she was asked this under oath, she denied ever telling the police this. It was the first time anyone was charged with a crime related to the Wales investigation, an indirect approach aimed at pressuring someone on the periphery of the conspiracy to talk. However, this tactic ultimately fell short, and in a somewhat spectacular way. In 2021, Reed struck a plea deal and pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor obstruction charge, receiving a sentence of 9 days in jail and a $25 fine. She also didn't provide any new information to advance the case whatsoever. In October 2021, the Justice Department doubled the reward for information about the slaying to $2.5 million, hoping to entice anyone with knowledge to come forward. Some believe that this will be sufficient to get someone on the very outskirts of knowledge of the conspiracy to break. As of 2025, however, this has been unsuccessful, and the case of Thomas Wales remains an unsolved mystery. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just quickly reminding you to hit that like button and share this video with your friends and family. Also, when you're done here, don't forget to check out my true crime channel where I focus exclusively on solved cases. On April 13, 1992, workers with the Wyoming Highway Department and a local sheriff made a grim discovery in Sheridan County, Wyoming. In a ditch along the southbound side of Interstate 90, about 5 miles south of the Montana border, lay the badly decomposed body of a young woman. She had no identification and no immediate clues to her name. Investigators determined the victim had likely been slain elsewhere and dumped beside the highway. In the absence of an identity, she became known simply as the Sheridan County Jane Doe. Interestingly, this is a case where we now know absolutely everything, except the identity of this Jane Doe. An autopsy revealed that the woman's death had occurred a couple months before her body was found, likely around February 1992. The first examination couldn't determine an exact cause of death, but foul play was strongly suspected. A later forensic review uncovered evidence of brutal violence. The young woman had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Despite advanced decomposition, investigators pieced together a detailed physical description. The victim was a white female in her late teens or early 20s, standing about 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing around 115 pounds. She had shoulder-length brown hair that was slightly wavy and notably sun-bleached, suggesting she spent a lot of time outdoors. Her eye color couldn't be determined due to the condition of the remains. Forensic dentists noted she had 5 fillings, indicating she had received dental care in life. Crucially, the medical examination also revealed that this young woman had been a mother. Her pelvic bones indicated she had given birth at least once prior to her death. Even more tragically, she was about 10 weeks pregnant at the time when she was slain. From the start, investigators believed that the Jane Doe had been ended somewhere else and dumped alongside Interstate 90. There were no signs of a struggle at the dump site, and the location next to a major highway suggested a quick, clandestine disposal, likely at night. This pointed to a chilling scenario. Perhaps a passing motorist or long-haul truck driver had picked up the young woman and later discarded her body on the lonely stretch of road. In fact, a working theory developed that she may have been a hitchhiker or transient who fell prey to a dangerous stranger. Keep this one in mind as we go forward in this case. One sheriff noted that her sun-lightened hair hinted she might even be from a warmer or southern climate, not a local Wyoming resident. If true, she could have journeyed hundreds of miles from home, which would explain why no local missing people matched with her. Investigators in 1992 had limited tools by our present-day standards, and forensic DNA technology was still in its infancy. Thankfully, they carefully documented the victim's fingerprints, collected DNA samples, and preserved her dental records. These were entered into national databases when those systems later became available, in hopes of a match to a missing person or a relative's DNA. Within the first year or two, law enforcement also became aware that the Sheridan County Jane Doe might not be an isolated case. Just 6 weeks before her body was found, another unidentified woman had been discovered on the other end of Wyoming under eerily similar circumstances. On March 1, 1992, a truck driver had spotted a body on Interstate 80 in Sweetwater County, Wyoming, a victim later nicknamed Bitter Creek Betty. An autopsy concluded she died from a vicious blow to the head, much like the Sheridan County Doe. Due to limited communications at the time, authorities saw the two events as separate crimes, given the 400-mile distance between the body dump sites. It would take advances in forensic science to connect these dots. Tests eventually showed that the same unknown male DNA was present in both the Sheridan County Jane Doe and Bitter Creek Betty cases. This meant a serial predator was stalking Wyoming's highways in 1992. One prevailing theory took shape. Both young women likely accepted rides from a truck driver or traveler who turned out to be a sadistic perpetrator. Despite this realization, throughout the 1990s the case grew increasingly cold, with no new leads. The two Jane Does remained unidentified, and their perp's identity was a mystery. The breakthrough would eventually come much later, and from a very unexpected direction. In 2019, investigators in Tennessee decided to reopen a cold case from 1991. This was the unsolved slaying of 32-year-old Pamela McCall, a pregnant woman found strangled off Interstate 65. DNA evidence had been preserved from that crime. When Tennessee forensic scientists generated a DNA profile of the suspect and ran it through the national database, they got a hit, but not to a name. Instead, it matched unknown DNA from 2 unsolved Wyoming attacks. This was the big break, proof that one man was behind at least 3 horrific attacks across 2 states. With 3 cases now connected by DNA, a task force of state police and the FBI intensified their hunt for the perpetrator. Traditional criminal databases still didn't have his identity, so agents turned to investigative genetic genealogy. They uploaded the unknown DNA profile to genealogical databases, searching for anyone who shared significant DNA segments with the mystery suspect. Before long, this process yielded results. A partial match to a relative of the perp was found in a public genealogy site. By building that person's family tree and zeroing in on the right age and gender, investigators identified a likely suspect, a long-haul truck driver from Iowa named Clark Perry Baldwin. To be sure, before making an arrest, agents covertly obtained Baldwin's DNA from items he had discarded. In April 2020, FBI surveillance in Waterloo, Iowa, picked up trash from Baldwin and tested what they found. The result was definitive. Baldwin's DNA matched the DNA from the Sheridan County Jane Doe, Bitter Creek Betty, and Pamela McCall crime scenes. After nearly 28 years of mystery, investigators finally had their man. On May 6, 2020, authorities descended on Baldwin's residence in Iowa and took the 59-year-old into custody. The former truck driver was charged with multiple counts of first-degree slaying for all the offenses he committed. Baldwin's background seemed to fit the profile investigators had long suspected. He had spent years as an over-the-road truck driver, crisscrossing the country. In fact, Baldwin had a violent history that included allegations strikingly similar to what likely happened to the Sheridan County Jane Doe. Back in 1991, he had been arrested in Texas for the assault of a 21-year-old hitchhiker. During that crime, he struck that woman on the head and threatened to end her life. He was facing significant time for this crime when something unexpected occurred. The woman he assaulted dropped off the face of the earth. Once this happened, the case against Baldwin rapidly fell apart. Upon his arrest, Baldwin was extradited first to Tennessee to face trial for the slaying of Pamela McCall. In early 2022, a jury in Tennessee found him guilty of that 1991 act, finally delivering justice for Pamela after 31 years. With the Tennessee case concluded, Baldwin was expected to be transferred to Wyoming to stand trial for the slayings of Bitter Creek Betty and the Sheridan County Jane Doe. Wyoming prosecutors have indicated that if convicted in their state, Baldwin could face life in prison or even the chair. As of now, Baldwin remains behind bars awaiting the Wyoming proceedings. Investigators from multiple states are continuing to collaborate on any other unsolved cases that might be connected to him. With an alleged perp identified and charged, one major question still looms. Who was the Sheridan County Jane Doe? Solving her slaying was a huge step, but from the beginning, investigators also wanted to give this young woman back her name. Further, as the forensic examination indicated, she was a mother, and her child is now in adulthood, and deserves to know what happened. Bitter Creek Betty also remains unidentified, and I'll be covering her case in a future episode, or perhaps as part of an update episode on the identities of both women. In July 2024, the body of Jacques Freitag, one of South Africa's most accomplished high jump athletes, was found in a field near a cemetery in Pretoria, riddled with bullets. The discovery ended a frantic 2-week search after his June 17th disappearance and marked the start of a shocking investigation into who committed the act. What initially appeared to be a tragic slaying would end up taking on much more sinister elements. Investigators would reveal that Freitag may have actually been eliminated due to his role as a hitman. Jacques Freitag soared to athletic glory in the early 2000s. Standing 6'8", he dominated South African high jumping for years and achieved some measure of international success. In 2003, he won the high jump at the World Championships in Paris, becoming the first South African to claim a world title in that event. He had also clinched World Junior and Youth Championship golds, making him one of the select few athletes to win world titles at youth, junior, and senior levels. He represented South Africa at the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens, further cementing his national prominence. These achievements made him a household name and a source of national pride in South African sports. but injuries and personal struggles later upended his life. After retiring from competition, Freitag reportedly battled severe depression and substance use problems. By 2024, he was facing financial difficulties and had moved back in with family in hopes of a fresh start. This troubled context made what happened next even more tragic and disturbing. On June 17, 2024, Freitag left his mother's home near Pretoria with a man who had offered him a job opportunity. He never returned home. Witnesses later recalled seeing him dropped off in Pretoria West that morning, after which he vanished. His family grew alarmed and filed a missing person report when they couldn't reach him. Then, on July 1st, a police search team found Freitag's body in an open field by Zandfontein Cemetery in Pretoria West. No meaningful attempts had been made to cover up what had happened. Investigators noted signs of overkill. He had been both shot up and stabbed repeatedly. This suggested to investigators that this was no random act of violence, and they immediately began looking into his inner circle. Suspicion soon fell on two people known to Freitag, 52-year-old Rudolf Lubb and 42-year-old Chantal Oosthuizen. It turned out Freitag knew the pair well and had spent time with them in the weeks before his death. By July 10th, police obtained warrants for their arrest, alleging the duo were behind the act. Rudolf, a disgraced former lawyer who had been disbarred in 2006 for fraud, and Chantal, his girlfriend, went on the run, sparking a nationwide manhunt. Less than a week later, officers tracked them to their hideout and arrested them without incident. A tip from a member of the public who had seen their photos in news reports led police to the fugitives' hideout. Both suspects were soon brought to court for the slaying, as well as other related offenses. They were remanded in custody as the investigation continued. The arrests answered the who, but the why remained a mystery. Stunning details about a possible motive soon emerged. Investigators allege that Lubb and Oosthuizen had entangled Freitag in an elaborate plot before eliminating him to cover up the evidence. Court documents indicate the couple conspired with Freitag to end Oosthuizen's fiancé, Louis Harms. In other words, they allegedly recruited Freitag, who was desperate for work, to act as a hitman in a plan to eliminate Harms. Lubb and Oosthuizen are accused of wanting Harms out of the picture so they could be together. In mid-June, just days before Freitag's own death, he reportedly attempted to ambush Harms in a failed attack arranged by the couple. Harms survived the assault and later described his ordeal to investigators, with evidence suggesting that Oosthuizen lured her fiancé to an apartment where Freitag lay in wait. This botched hit is believed to have been the catalyst for Freitag's demise. When the plan against Harms fell through, police believe that the couple turned on Freitag to silence him and cover their tracks, since he was their known associate. At present, the authorities are still trying to untangle the true extent of what happened, and all parties are innocent until proven guilty.